apologize for the slight delay. We're just waiting for one more member to come in, and we will begin. Due to the fires down in Ventura County, the vice chair is not coming up, Audra Strickland, and at least one member called me to tell me he missed his flight. So we'll see who else. We have several other members that are going to be arriving shortly. We're going to go ahead and get started as a subcommittee of the oversight and that's funny. The Accountability and Administrative Review Committee. I so often have to describe it to people as an oversight committee that I forget the name. Today's hearing is an oversight hearing on the California State Lottery Commission. A couple of comments before we get started. The legislative oversight function is one that applies to any state entity. If there are tax dollars involved, if there are other dollars that are coming from the people of California into an agency of government, especially one that has appointees from the governor's office, clearly there is a legislative oversight role. We're going to be talking a little bit about that because there seems to be a little confusion about that role. Administrative costs we're going to be looking at today in terms of the Lottery Commission. When the lottery was created in California by ballot measure, it was sold as a way to fund education. And I know my colleagues out in their districts get exactly what I get, which is, well, doesn't the lottery fund education? And they don't have a sense of how little comes of the total education budget comes from the lottery. And so I think it's incumbent upon us, because we're the ones who are getting it on a day-to-day basis from constituents, that as much of the funding that comes in through the lottery goes to education. And so I want to look at administrative costs and how the commission accounts for its administrative costs. The third point is game integrity. Clearly, any kind of game that is played where the money is involved, whether it's a card club or an Indian casino or horse racing or a lottery, the integrity of the game is of the utmost importance. So we will be looking into that as well. And finally, we want to do a slight. This is not a rehashing of a hearing that happened in the Senate Government Organization Committee. That was done several months ago. But there is something of interest from that hearing that we want to follow up on. Not to go over the subject matter of that hearing, which was a Christmas party or an end-of-year party or employee recognition party. But some of the things that were said and done in that hearing, obviously, we want to follow up on. So with that, I want to invite Robert Pratt and Sheila Mohan from the Legislative Counsel's office, Jeff Brownfield from Director of Audits Division in the State Office of the State Controller, and Jason Dickerson, Director of the State Administration Division, LAO.
Good morning, Assemblymember Delatorre. Bob Pratt, Principal Deputy Legislative Counsel, here with Sheila Mohan, Deputy Legislative Counsel.
Good morning. I had just a few comments regarding the State Lottery Commission. And first off, relative to laws of general application, this would be, for example, the California Public Records Act, Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, laws that generally apply to state agencies. Those laws also apply to the Lottery Commission. To the extent that there is no conflict, no substantive conflict with the Lottery Act, and also to the extent those laws are not made expressly inapplicable to the Commission. And there are a few, for instance, the Administrative Procedure Act. Also, the legislature is able to amend the Lottery Act in ways that affect the powers and duties of the Lottery Commission. This would be, as you likely know, by the terms of the Lottery Act, which provide for the amendment of the Act by a statute enacted by 2/3 vote of each House to further the purpose of the Act, or by an Act that becomes effective upon approval of the voters. That's really the extent of my comments. If there's specific questions, I'm certainly happy to address. Mr. Pratt is also available to address the investigatory powers of the legislature.
Could you address the investigatory powers of the legislature with regard to this entity?
Well, somewhat. I don't have a prepared statement, but I think that your introductory comments were succinctly and correctly stated, that the legislature has an inherent authority to investigate the affairs of government, particularly Article 4, Section 11 of the California Constitution authorizes either house of the legislature to provide committees to ascertain facts and make recommendations to the legislature on subjects within legislative control, and that would include budgetary functions. Within that, the parameters of this committee's authority, the investigative authority of the legislature is very broad. Legislature has authority to issue subpoenas, to call witnesses, to compel documents to be produced. And so long as the investigation serves a legislative purpose, which again is broad, meaning for the purpose of regulating the affairs of the legislature or of investigating legislation that might be proposed or looked into, or changes to the law, those are all things that are proper for legislative oversight.
Thank you.
And I think to get to the heart of this, as it affects the Lottery Commission, because this is an inherent and a constitutional power of oversight, unless there is a constitutional exception or the legislature has carved its own exception. If the Act has an exception, there is not a limitation upon the legislature's ability to investigate the affairs of the Commission.
And clearly in the Proposition 37, which created the lottery, it says that the director shall present an annual audited financial statement to the Commission, the governor, the controller, the treasurer, the attorney general, and the legislature. Clearly, they knew that they had to directly report to us, along with those others. And what was already mentioned, that the legislature may amend the Act if by doing so it furthers the purposes of the Act. Clearly, any legislative process that would lead to that legislation would require some kind of investigation. It wouldn't be just a shot in the dark, I would hope. So I think I just want to lay this out right up front, because there have been some difficulties in getting materials from the Lottery Commission specifically. Assemblymember Emerson?
Yeah, Deputy Legislative Counsel Mohan,
Yes.
I'd like you gave us some broad ideas about what the Act, but what is the specific purpose of the Act?
The specific purpose of the Act is to increase funding for public education. I believe it's stated almost identically to that in the Act itself.
But this is money that doesn't go into
General fund?
General fund.
No.
It's just dollars that are distributed to schools directly.
As to the specific mechanism, I could
Okay.
find out for you and give you that
Okay.
information.
Thank you.
And to be specific, and this might give the Lottery Commission a little bit of time, we asked for 2 items that were not provided to us. One is records for travel, lodging, meals associated with marketing activities held in conjunction with sporting events, going back to the beginning of this year, and all of the Make Me a Millionaire game show audit reports, including any exceptions. Those were 2 items that were requested. Apparently, we received baseball for 2009. So I don't know if that's all the sporting events or not, but that's what we've received. Any other questions of the Ledge Council? Yes.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether Mr. Pratt or Ms. Mohan, this is more appropriate to either one of you can answer. There was some reference in the materials to those things that the legislature could do on a 2/3 vote that further the purposes of the act, and then those things that would have to go to the voters as a change. Could you touch upon how far the legislature can go before having to take it to the voters?
Well, it's going to be a case-by-case analysis depending on what exactly is being done in the legislation. An example of something that did not further the purposes would be the Lottery Modernization Act, which recently was defeated in the last election, Prop 1C, I believe. And the bottom line is that it has to be for the benefit of public education, and how that's parsed has very dramatically depending on the specific details of the legislation.
Well, my understanding is one of the pieces that was included in the lottery securitization was
Yes.
also a measure that would provide more flexibility for the lottery to increase payouts to make them more comparable with other states, and hopefully then increase the sales for lottery, which would then increase the money to education. And is
I
that
believe that is an argument that has been made. I don't know that everyone agrees with that argument. Certainly to the extent that total funds are increased, that you could make the argument that you're increasing the funding for public education. There are, however, specific percentages of the income that is collected from the lottery proceeds. Specific percentages have to be paid out pursuant to the terms of the Lottery Act. And if the percentage that's paid out is increased, that's going to have to come out of somewhere else. So if you're paying an extra 5, 10, 15% in prizes, that's either going to have to come out of the amounts that are paid to education or the administrative costs of the commission.
One more question, and it may be appropriate for someone else on the panel, but some of the materials that we received did say that administrative expense has been less than what is allocated under the proposition. So 16% is what's the maximum administrative expense, and to the extent that the lottery has been able to keep those expenses down to 12%, that extra 4%, according to our materials, should be going towards education, but instead have been going to increase payouts. Have you opined on?
My understanding of the Lottery Act is that any amounts that are not used of that 16% should be funneled to public education and not towards increased payouts.
Assemblymember Emerson.
What is the, do the schools have flexibility in how the dollars are spent that they get from the lottery? Can they use that for administrative costs? Or?
I believe that the lottery is very specific as to what they can use it for. I don't know off the top of my head, though, what that is. And again, I can provide that for you after the meeting.
You want to ask of these folks? Okay. Assemblywoman Buchanan.
Schools have some flexibility. Any amount over, I forget what year it is, when it passed, has to go to textbooks and instructional materials. And they have some flexibility, I think, for the first, what is it, $110 or something per student. But the reality is the lottery provides a very small percentage of funding for education. You know, state PTA opposed the lottery when it first came out with the belief that, you know, taxpayers would think that they'd see these multi-million-dollar jackpots and education would be fully funded, and it's never happened. In fact, the very first year the lottery came out and generated money, education funding was cut, and it was used to supplant funding for education, so it's never generated more funding, and it's not much that they have to deal with. And again, any amount over, I forget what year it is, has to be spent on instructional materials.
I believe that's consistent with my recollection.
Phenomenal campaign and marketing. We can move on to the state controller's office and get a report from them. Jeff?
Yes. Hi, Jeff Brownfield, California State Controller's Office. And I have with me Andy Finlayson from the Controller's Office. Andy's in charge of our lottery audit function. Controller's Office has been involved with the lottery since its inception, since 1984. And in the Lottery Act, it does require the controller to conduct audits of the lottery. To fulfill these responsibilities, the controller audits payments to all winners. We conduct and test payment system reviews of all online enhancements and new game data as needed. We review the quarterly transfer in regards to all monies being transferred to the Ed Fund, which eventually goes to the kids. And in recent years, we've assisted the lottery in doing their biannual internal audit requirement to meet the state's FSMA audit requirements. They currently do that themselves. They're now staffed in their internal audit shops where they can do that themselves. We periodically complete a risk assessment looking at the different areas of the lottery and trying to identify which ones we believe may have higher risk and require audit attention. And we perform, based on those risk assessments, we do perform a variety of compliance audits. We have also done a review of the lottery's financial audit and looked at the work papers in that of their financial auditor and satisfied ourselves that the financial audit was appropriate. And so we do a variety of items. I was just kind of following up on the discussion that's why I'm sorry I got preoccupied. But it's following up on your discussion of the money going from prizes to schools. And the basic hard stone items is that the prizes will be 50% or greater of sales. Admin will be 16% or less of sales. And schools will get 34% or more, minimum of 34%. Now, when we do our quarterly reviews, Lottery tells us how much money they want to transfer for the previous quarter. It's generally a month or two after the quarter has been complete. And then we'll review what that transfer consists of. We look at what the administrative costs are, and we look at what the prize payouts are, and look to see if they're in these relevant ranges for these percentages as stipulated. Keep in mind these are annual percentage requirements, not quarterly. And so when we have seen lottery may be shy in an area during a quarter, we'll mention to them. They've already been aware of it themselves. And to the best of my knowledge, I can't remember the lottery ever being out of line in any fiscal year. In regard to the item in additional prize money being paid out instead of the additional money going to schools, that discussion item that was just discussed, It's our understanding CTA agreed to the additional money going to prizes, and so therefore it would generate more sales. And I know there's always been a discussion, does it really generate more sales or not, but that was an item that was brought about. And that's what we have.
Well, I think the looks that we're giving each other is why would CTA have a say in the amount of money that goes to education?
If I recall correctly, the voters approved the change in terms of the split between general fund and the other, but the way I read the lottery is that at least 34% to education, at least 50% to prizes, no more than 16% to administration. So it doesn't mean you can't pay 35% to education or 51% out to prizes. It just means you can't pay any more than 16% to administration. So if I'm reading it correctly, the amount of monies that have been distributed are consistent with the lottery law right from the very beginning. I could be wrong. So
No, that's accurate. But in terms of there being extra, an incremental amount extra that could have gone to either prizes or education, and the decision was made to let it go to the prizes, and the statement was made that CTA said it was okay.
I think as I recall, it went to the voters. So CTA may have supported it in the polls.
That was her understanding on that they supported it, and that there was discussion with them just to get their buy-in on it.
For an external thing, not for an internal decision.
Right.
Okay. All right. In terms of what are considered administrative costs, I think it's to me, it's very straightforward. Prizes are prizes. The checks that are written to the schools are education, and everything else is admin. Am I missing something in that calculation?
That's correct.
So when they reported last year, 53.1% in prizes, 34.43% in contributions to education, and then they break out the admin into three subsets, so none of them look very big. But it's 10, 11, like 12.5% roughly. There's in the public education component and in the prize component, there are no administrative costs, what a civilian would call administrative costs, meaning money that did not go to either a school or to a prize winner.
That's correct.
Any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
I do have a question. The money that's distributed to you from the lottery, to ed fund, there's an education fund. Do you assume the administrative costs for distributing those to the individual schools at that point, or is that included in the lotteries up to 16% of the administrative cost?
Our division of accounting and reporting distributes some money as part of their apportionment process, and those costs get charged back to the lottery.
Now, we've been focusing on these overall categories, the three overall categories. Now, within the admin costs, do you look at the appropriateness of expenditures, or do you just do financial analysis to say, these checks went to schools, these checks went to prize winners, and then all of these were spent either in-house, employees, contractors, et cetera, et cetera? Or do you actually get down into the appropriateness of those expenditures?
Well, we principally focus on is in the compliance, or the complying with their laws, regulations, what they're supposed to do for that specific type of expenditure. Is it an appropriate expenditure that could be made, but it's in compliance with? Is it in compliance with?
So again,
We're not going to second guess the lottery in regards to, was that okay to do that? But we'd say, are you complying with your laws and regulations?
so that's a very kind of high level, 30,000 foot level overview of their expenditures. It's not like an audit that we would get from the state auditor's office, for example.
It's not a performance audit.
Okay, thank you. Getting back to the previous question about the balance between education, and I realize the ballot. I don't remember that the shift was done, but apparently others do.
Mr. De La Torre?
Yes.
I don't remember that shift being done either.
Okay.
I'm looking at 8880.4.
Yeah, I'm looking at 8880.32, Section 5, point 5, Section 5, and it says, to the extent that expenses of the lottery are less than 16% of the total annual revenues, any surplus funds also shall be allocated to the benefit of public education, as specified in this section or in Section 8880.
I believe the
0.5.
change that they're referring to may have been part of the Lottery Modernization Act, but that act
That
wasn't
didn't pass.
No.
So we're going to want to ask about this issue, because it's pretty clear to me that the money goes to education that is not spent on administrative costs. Anything further from the Comptroller's office?
No.
Okay, thank you. Jason from LAO.
Jason Dickerson from the analyst's office. Have a handout the sergeant will distribute. Going back to some of the questions that have been asked from Mr. Emerson, the lottery funds don't touch the general fund. They are entirely a part and supplemental funds for public education. The Lottery Act says that funds allocated from lottery proceeds shall be used exclusively for the education of pupils and students, and no funds shall be spent for acquisition of real property, construction of facilities, financing of research, or any other non-instructional purposes. Much of the funding, as has been pointed out, lottery funds provide only a very small amount of funding to our schools as a percentage of their overall budgets. Most of that funding is fairly flexible. However, 50% under legislation that was approved by the voters. There have been amendments to the Lottery Act both by the legislature to further the purposes of the act and also by the voters with this one provision. The voters provided that 50% of increases to education provided after 1997-98 will go for instructional materials, so textbooks and other instructional materials. On the other question of what the legislature may do to amend the act, as was pointed out, the stated purpose in the text of the act is to provide supplemental funds to education. However, as legislative council opinions have pointed out, if the legislature enacts an amendment to further the purposes of an initiative measure, the courts are not necessarily bound to look only at that sentence of the act to determine whether or not it's appropriate. There are other purposes of the act. For example, legislative council opined a couple of years ago that in response to an inquiry from Senator Flores that he released publicly, that proposals to privatize the lottery may have difficulty passing muster to further the purposes of the act, even if it could be assumed that it would increase the funds to public education, because there are other parts of this act that would limit the ability of the lottery to do that. So the issue of what the legislature may do, ultimately the legislature has to make a decision about whether or not a proposed amendment furthers the purposes of the act. And then if someone disagrees with that, they would have the ability to go to the courts and seek a court review of the entire picture, and ultimately the courts would look at the entire record on a case-by-case basis, as was stated. On the handout we have, I'll go through it just briefly. I think a lot of the items have been covered. On page 1, just to provide an overview, the lottery is very different from most state departments, and we think that as we advise you on how we would suggest conducting oversight, we would suggest that the oversight for the lottery has to be quite a bit different as well. This is a retail sales organization. It's very different from other state departments. And so that means we suggest the legislature focus on how the lottery is maximizing sales in order to achieve its primary mission of providing supplemental funding to education. The lottery has a great deal of independence because of its unique role. It's desirable that it has some independence from the traditional way that departments are run and overseen. However, the legislature certainly has an ongoing role. For example, as the chair pointed out, it is important for the legislature to make sure that public funds are handled properly, and it's certainly very important to ensure that game integrity is maintained, because game integrity plays a pretty key role in ensuring that consumers have the confidence to buy lottery tickets and to help it fulfill its main function. On to page 2, we talked about this. I would just point out the Lottery Act has very rigid formulas. The California Lottery Act was one of the relatively early pieces of legislation to be drafted in the last 20 years when a number of states have created lotteries. And so it has these rigid percentages. And one of the problems with that, if you go to page 3, is that it's fairly well established, I think, at this point, that the rigidity of the formulas in the lottery law help make the California lottery a low-performing lottery. Because let's say that that the lottery is able to save money on administrative funding. That extra money, on the one hand, it may seem perfectly sensible to provide that money to public education, but it may actually do public education more good to devote some or all of that money to prizes, because that can generate more sales and then enable more distributions to public education. More prizes, in general, up to a point, attract more consumers, and that can generate more profits for the lottery. Now, separate from that, you do have to consider what the law actually requires, and it is a very confusing law, I will say, if you go through and read it. But one of the problems with the voter-approved initiative is that it is relatively inflexible, and that more flexibility may well enable the lottery to generate more profits for public education. On to page 4. This figure looks at the distributions of the lottery to public education. The lower line, the lighter line, looks at how those distributions are adjusted for inflation going back to the first year the lottery was operating, the first fiscal year, 1985-86. Lottery funds are a very small part, under 1.2% of K-12's budget in 2008-9. And lottery distributions to education have not kept up with inflation for much of the lottery's existence. Lottery sales have been declining, have been on a declining path since 2005-06 up until the most recently completed fiscal year. But I think it is important to note that sales trends have leveled off recently. The lottery has had a couple of very successful quarters continuing into this fiscal year. And in recent years, the lottery has increased its focus on improving its brand image and improving its business planning. And it does appear that these efforts may be partly responsible for this leveling off of performance. On page 5, we offer some closing thoughts on the legislature's oversight role for the lottery. As I mentioned, we believe it's important for the legislature to focus on sales of the lottery and its distributions to education, which are driven by those sales. We think that it's important to try to sharpen the lines of accountability with the lottery. The lottery's had a lot of turnover in its executive ranks over the years, and I think that many agree that this has inhibited the lottery's ability to engage in the sort of long-term planning that recently has begun to show some success. Governors also have failed to meet their statutory requirement to fill Lottery Commission vacancies within 30 days. And these factors, among others, have sometimes made it difficult for the legislature to hold lottery commissioners and executive staff accountable, after all, if they haven't been there that long. And if there is barely a quorum on the Lottery Commission, it's very difficult to hold them accountable. A number of the lottery executive staff are appointed by the governor's office, the director by the governor's office with the confirmation approval of the Senate. The legislature may want to consider over time whether changes to the appointment process for the executive staff can be made, and to the commission perhaps, to increase accountability. We recommended 25 years ago now that the lottery's administrative expenditures be brought essentially on budget, treated like every other department. Most other departments anyway, have to submit budget change proposals during the budget process when they want to change something about their administrative budget. That's the normal process. That budget process can be difficult and complex for departments, that's true, but it's designed to give the legislature a way to ask questions, to learn more, to investigate. And so we have recommended for a long time that administrative budget be brought into the normal budget process. The legislature, we believe, needs to engage on a regular basis with commissioners and executive staff of the lottery and other stakeholders to see whether there need to be amendments to the Lottery Act to enhance its ability to increase sales and to operate in the best manner possible. The Lottery Act was written 25 years ago. It clearly does not allow the lottery to do the best job that it can in generating funds for public education. And so over time, amendments will be needed. The legislature has made amendments over time. In some cases, as we've been discussing, voter approval of those amendments may be required. And then finally, here's a very fine line for legislative oversight. The lottery, in its unique role, a sales organization, having to respond to consumer tastes that are changing all the time, they need some degree of independence. That doesn't mean the legislature doesn't have an oversight role. We think it certainly has an oversight role to ensure that the lottery is obeying the law, doing the best job it can in maximizing sales, promoting the integrity of games, and so forth. We don't think the two are inconsistent necessarily. The legislature doesn't need to be involved in micromanaging the day-to-day affairs of the lottery, but rather holding the executive staff and the commissioners accountable for their actions. So with that, I'll close, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Yeah, you mentioned that because of the rigid formulas, the lottery is almost set up for poor performance compared to other states. What are you basing that on? Is it an economic analysis? Have there been studies done comparing and contrasting the different models in different states, or is that just the LAO's opinion?
Well, that's our opinion based on reviewing academic literature as well as the actual performance of other states over time. One of the most compelling stories happened about 6 or 7 years ago in Florida. Florida, prior to 2002, had a similar system to ours where they had a rigid percentage payout. Their legislature authorized the lottery in that state to increase that payout to a level that the lottery department there determined maximized the profits going to education. They did that, and it dramatically increased the profits that went to education. In other states that have much higher payouts, there is a higher per capita sales rate. Now, that's our opinion. We think that the bulk of the evidence is on that. One of the challenges, though, if the legislature wanted to consider an amendment to the Lottery Act, is that until it actually happens, we can't prove that that's true. We can't say for sure that if you loosen the lottery prize payout restrictions, that would result in increase of funds in public education. We think the best evidence is, but we wouldn't know until we tried.
Florida shows that.
Can you get for us the academic literature that you based your opinion on? Because you said it's looking at the Florida example as well as looking at academic literature. I don't have any of those citations, and one of the things,
a lot of it, I'll tell
well, one of the things we're looking at, and one of the recommendations by the chair and the staff was to do a performance audit, and I really question whether there's a need to do a performance audit when we're doing accounting audits on a quarterly basis of the lottery. I want to see what the academic literature is and what if there are any other economic models out there. I think that we would gain a better understanding of how to hone in on this problem if we had those resources. So to the extent you've already reviewed those rather than recreating the wheel, can you get those resources to us?
I will try to gather that. I think one of the challenges is that there's not a lot of academic research on lotteries per se. There is on other types of gambling, okay, that basically look at how prize payouts and profits relate. There's very little on lotteries. One of the challenges with lotteries that many researchers have found is that lotteries, in some cases, either aren't open with the information that they have, or oftentimes because they're public entities, they may not spend as much as, say, private casinos do in gathering data that allows researchers to look at it. So I will respond, I will get you some information, but I will say there's actually not a lot that's done by on lotteries, and one of the challenges is that with the available data, you kind of have to take some of the literature from other types of gambling and extrapolate, make assumptions, essentially, about how it would apply to lotteries. And that's an imperfect science.
Assemblywoman Buchanan.
Yeah, and a follow-up question before I get to Allison or Assemblymember Huber. So Florida made a change and had an increase. I mean, if you go by your chart on page 4, you take a look at, I don't remember what the change was back there, but you had a big increase, and then it obviously didn't sustain. So did Florida, after they had that increase, was it sustained or not sustained? Do we know?
I haven't looked at Florida in the last, since the special election. I believe that, like most states, it was experiencing some leveling off in line with the recession. I think that by and large it has held up, but I'll try to get you the most recent data we have.
Because it seems to me that there's a threshold here. I mean, you're not going to be able to increase lottery sales year after year after year. Mm-hmm. And there's an inherent question we have in terms of how much do we want education relying on lottery sales for it to fund its basic programs when there is that variability, and how much do we want to rely on the people who pay the lottery play the games, because we know they'll tell you the chances of winning are less than if you do go to a casino or somewhere else and play other games. Do we want to rely on that kind of gambling to fund education? And I think those aren't easy questions to answer, but somehow in here it almost sounds like there's an idea that, well, we can just kind of keep increasing this and we're going to provide all that much more money to education. If you somehow could double the amount, instead of providing 1.2, you're going to provide 2.4%. I'm not saying that's not significant, but I'm just saying that sounds to me like the same lie the public was fed when the lotto came out, that we're going to save education by creating the lottery. I mean, so I don't know how much potential there is out there, and certainly there are other questions that are built into this. I mean, I'd almost think, and with the last proposition that was on the ballot, if I recall correctly, the idea behind securitizing the lottery was going to be to backfill the amount that schools were getting from the general fund so that all of the money could go to securitizing it. So essentially you were removing education from the lottery, which in some ways probably would make more sense. So you're not relying on, schools aren't relying on gambling profits and how they fluctuate with the economy for funding.
Okay. Assemblymember Emerson.
The question I have is, in the 1984 Act that established the lottery, state lottery, there was no multi-state lottery at that point.
That's correct.
So did the voters then approve, when we made the change in that fact that issues had to go, certain percentage went to textbooks and all, so that's when they approved the multi-state at that same time? Is that... historically, I'm
the multi-state, I think, essentially was approved through first through lottery administrative action. I believe that was challenged in the courts, and the courts essentially, with some changes, upheld the lottery's participation.
So
if I recall correctly,
there was no voter approval on that whole process. Then, okay, thank you.
Assemblymember Berryhill.
I'm up.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just curious. I came in a little bit late, but you mentioned that the Florida model has worked good. They've brought in a lot more money. You also mentioned that a lot of this stuff needs review and whatnot. who reviews all this stuff? Because we sit out here and you hear a lot of stuff about, the average guy out there hears a lot of stuff about the lottery, and we don't know, nobody knows how it works, and nobody knows who reviews it. Is this an inwardly thing that internally that you take a look at it and make decisions on what is best and what you're going to do going forward, or do you look to outside sources, private sources that take a look at the thing to how you might make it better? How does the whole thing work?
Well, our job at the LAO is to provide you with advice, and then you decide what to do with that advice. I think that in the system that voters set up, the primary role of oversight and control of the lottery rests with the Lottery Commission in our state. And so I think that their job is obviously to make the decisions month to month, quarter to quarter about the lottery's key moves, to consider what's happening in the market and perhaps even in other states and countries, and the Lottery Commission, with the help of the executive staff and in some cases the governor, to come to the legislature when they believe that changes are needed. And so I think that one of the things that we suggest, one of the valuable roles for this committee and for other committees of the legislature, is regularly engaging with lottery commissioners and the lottery executive staff to see what changes can be made. I think the primary role of oversight in our system is with the Lottery Commission, and so it's very important that the governor select and that the Senate look at and confirm people who have good judgment to be on that commission.
How many people are on that commission?
There are 5 seats. I believe there are currently 3 members of the commission. The governor is obligated under law to fill vacancies within 30 days. There have been vacancies longer than 30 days.
How many vacancies do we have right now then?
I believe we currently have 2.
We got 2? Okay, so it's important if somebody's going to be doing this oversight all the time that we have guys doing the oversight.
I think that's true.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Do you know the 2 vacancies, how long? You said they're longer than 30 days. Do you have
I don't have the exact date. They've been there a long time, I think.
I think in the annual report that's here, there's only 3. And this was done, this is July of 08.
Mm-hmm.
So has it been since July of 08 that we've only had 3?
I believe so, yeah, if not longer.
I think the governor's breaking the law here.
And I think one of the challenges is that obviously it's sometimes difficult to find people to take the time to do this sort of task. They are paid essentially on a per diem basis. But Section 8880.16, subsection D, said that vacancies shall be filled within 30 days by the governor, subject to the advice and consent of the Senate.
Assemblymember Emerson.
Do we have any idea if there's been applications to fill those spots? Do we know that?
No. But we can follow up with this with the governor's office and find out what the status is of these 2 vacancies, reminding them about their 30-day obligation. I'm very interested in your recommendation on page 5 about bringing the lottery into a special fund, and that those monies be made subject to an annual appropriation. At least once a year we would know that it was at least being looked at by the legislature. I think it's not one of the recommendations in our on our list today because your report was just published. But I think it's a valuable mechanism for annual oversight. Other than this hearing, the only other hearing that I'm aware of is one that took place earlier this year, which was in reaction to press reports to the incident that happened at the employee recognition event. And so, I think having a regular discussion about the lottery and its performance and how things are going, I think makes a whole lot of sense. And that later on the members might talk about that.
I think also there was a hearing, I believe last year, also in the Senate Governmental Organization Committee that looked at the proposals then for the so-called lottery modernization to change the rules. I believe they had testimony from the lottery officials from another state, North Carolina, and so forth. But I think you're correct that lottery oversight hearings of that type have probably been sporadic over time.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions? All right, thank you all very much. Stick around. We may have further questions. Tom, you have any other questions?
No, I'm good.
All right.
Hang on a minute. Let me think about that.
Okay, we'll ask the Executive Director of the California State Lottery Commission, Joan Barucki, to come forward at this time. Thank you. Welcome.
Good morning.
You can start.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members. I'm Joan Barucki. I'm the director of the California Lottery. I've brought with me today my chief counsel, Sylvia Cates, not realizing that there was going to be so much confusion about the legal authority. It seemed like a good idea now. A few things that were mentioned prior to my getting up here that I think I should probably clarify. However, first, let me thank you for paying attention to the lottery. Quite honestly, it is rare to find a legislator that would like to talk with us and hear what we're doing, because there have been a lot of good things happening at the lottery lately. I arrived at the lottery almost 3 years ago. That makes me the longest running director in the lottery's history, which is an issue in of itself. And in those last 3 years, when I first got there, realized that the lottery had not done a lot of long-term planning. Most of their planning was year to year, coinciding with their annual budget approvals by their commission. We took a step to develop a business plan, which we had shared with everyone in the legislature. This is our 2007 to 2010 business plan, which was basically a performance review of the California Lottery over the last 20-some years, and an assessment of what was going well and what was going wrong, because at the time I went over to the lottery, playership had dipped from an all-time high of about 58% of California's eligible population to down to 43%, and the trend line was to continue downward. As I mentioned in Senator Flores' hearing on this issue, if that trend line continued, within 10 years we would be discussing how to close the doors at the lottery, which certainly doesn't benefit our beneficiary education. So we conducted this review. We started to implement in the last 18 months some of the recommendations that came out of the review. We're progressing with those. Some of those, as Jason Dickerson mentioned, have resulted in some increase in playership, and we've been able to stem the bleeding, so to speak. And now we're looking to start growing sales. Within the restrictions and the limitations that we have, we'll continue to talk to the legislature about the prize payout relief as often as we can, because we have seen substantial results, and results not just in Florida. You can look to New York, you can look to Georgia, North Carolina, being one of the newly formed lotteries, has had great results. We've had results here in California as well, when we're able to take our administrative money and increase our scratcher, the amount of money going into our scratchers prize payouts for every dollar additional that we put into a Scratchers prize payout, we get an additional $7 in sales, which results in an additional $2 for education. We know that from our own experience here. One of the reasons why you have seen a decline the last since 2005-06 and now a leveling off in the sales was because in 2005-06 there was an influx of savings that year that was put into prize payouts, which fueled sales for that year. Since then, because we don't have the sales to sustain that, we've had to cut back on the prize payouts, which then cuts back on sales, which then cuts back on prize payouts. So it's this huge circular thing that we're in, which also means I'm cutting back on administrative funds and my administrative cost, which means I'm also cutting back on marketing, which also helps the fuel sales. So the lottery's been caught in this vicious downward spiral, which hopefully we've stemmed at this point. We've found some things that are starting to appeal to players again. We found different kinds of games that are bringing in new players that have not played the lottery before. But again, as Assemblywoman Buchanan mentioned, this is a small amount of education's overall budget. And it's always been very frustrating for the California Lottery because there is that thing that the California Teachers Association refers to as the lottery effect. They go out to talk to their constituents, they go out to talk to teachers, to parents, and they all think that the lottery took care of education, and it did not. I mean, it's a small amount. It works out to about $140 per pupil in K through 12. That's maybe one textbook. So the beneficial part of that, though, is that the lottery money comes with no strings other than you can't spend it for capital projects and you have to spend a certain percentage on textbooks. So it doesn't go back through the general fund. It's separate money that comes down. They're supposed to account for it separately from all their other Prop 98 monies, but it doesn't come down in all the categories, so they do get to use the money where they think they need it the most. The Department of Education conducts annual audits to find out how the schools are using the lottery money. Actually, they hadn't been done until Jack O'Connell came into office, and he started doing them. And primarily the money goes for teacher salaries to the most extent, which you can't get more instructional than that because it's lottery money is supposed to be used for instructional purposes. A little bit back to the prize payout issues. One of the most shining examples of what happens with prize payouts is Texas, because Texas had the authority to grow their percentage going to prize payout. They had done so. The legislature decided that they didn't want that anymore. In 1999, they reversed it and took away, and the prize payouts plummeted, and Texas sales dropped significantly, almost in half. A year later, their legislator came back and said that was a mistake, and they reversed it, and they gave them the authority back. Since then, their sales have been growing again. So that's, for me, a real-life example of what happens when you deal with that. Couple other things on our administration expenditures, and there seemed to be some confusion about us being able to use administrative dollars to supplement our prize fund. Actually, if you go to Government Code 8880.64, it authorizes the Commission to add to that prize pool with our administrative dollars. But we are also required at the end of the fiscal year, if there's any savings in our administrative fund, it goes to education. In years past, we have given anywhere between $13 to $28 million a year at the end of the year to education that have been leftover savings. One other thing that I want to mention about this business plan, this is something that I have to do every year for my commissioners before they will approve my budget, because my budget has to be based on the performance review, the goals. I have to set sales goals. We have to talk about what we're going to do for the upcoming year, how much marketing, what's the product makeup that we're going to be looking at, are there any new games coming out, what's the annual marketing plan, and then based on that, they adopt a business plan, the annual component of the business plan, and then based on that, they adopt the budget at a subsequent meeting. So it's very much a separated process, and quite honestly, having been CFO at Caltrans for many, many years and spent a lot of time in front of legislative budget committees, I would love for the rest of the state government to operate this way. You will never get a true picture of really what's going on in state agencies and state departments. You're going to see the increment of change that they're bringing to you. I have to basically come in and justify everything I'm doing to my commission every year with my annual budget. And I've been on both sides of state government. Don't think I ever want to go back to the other side. This is, if there's some way we can transport what we do here over to the rest of state government, I think you would be a lot happier as well. I must apologize because I did not realize we have not gotten all the information to your staff person, because I know yesterday when they brought in the copies of all the audit reports to me, they told me they were taking all the copies of the audit reports over to you for the game show, which I believe you did get. And as far as sporting events, there's only been baseball. There's nothing else, unless someone else is going to something that I don't know about. But that's all that we've done this year. And then vacancies on the commission. Yes, it is very difficult to only have 3 members on a 5-member commission. And we scream and yell as loud as we can about that, but it is a difficult process to get people interested and process to go through as well. And it would make my life a lot easier because I'd be able to schedule a lot more meetings if I had a full commission and didn't have to worry about my quorum being present. The governmental organization committees, we're always open to them. We try to spend a lot of time. I make myself open to anybody in the legislature, whether it's staff or assembly people or senators, to meet with them. Always willing for that. And then one other clarification. At year end, education doesn't just get the 34%. Education also gets any interest income that I have on any of my investments. They also get the unclaimed prizes. And then, of course, they get any savings that I have in my administrative budget at year end as well. And there hasn't been one year that I've been there that there hasn't been administrative savings at year end. I will tell you right now that as soon as I see that we're even coming close to potentially not making the 34%, or that sales are starting to dip, we do a revised budget. We cut cost. We go back to our commission immediately, who adopts a new budget, and that's the budget we start to operate off of.
Thank you. Assemblywoman Huber.
I'm on a roll here. I'm going to ask everybody a question. So I have a lot of questions for you. Obviously, you've got the most information for us because, as you can imagine, as an accountability committee, we want to make sure that the oversight structure that was put in place by the voters is actually being effective. Mm-hmm. And so I do want you to talk a little bit more about the vacancies on the commission. And you know, I know it's not really our role to fill those vacancies, but not having the people who are charged with oversight and how that impacts your ability to do your job or to be transparent is of critical importance to us. So I do want you to talk about that. But I also wanted you to talk about something that we haven't touched on yet in this hearing, and that's the new building.
Okay.
I'm pretty concerned that we see trend lines of the amount of money going to education going down, the impact when adjusted for inflation is even more pronounced, and at the same time you're building a new building. And I know that sometimes that's economically justified. The controller can probably talk about it. An example where they were going to save money by moving into a new building and getting new furniture, but we ended up making us lose money by keeping them where they were, so they had to pay more rent instead of owning a building. So I get that there might be economic justifications for it, but it's something that we're not hearing. So if you could also touch on that, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. I'm sorry, first part.
First part is the oversight.
Oh, yes, commission. Yes. Okay, the Lottery Commission consists of 5 appointees by the governor. I currently have 3 appointees. I can have no more than a majority from the same political party. And as well, the Lottery Act calls out that one of my commissioners has to be a CPA, Certified Public Accountant, and another one of my commissioners has to represent law enforcement, has to come from the law enforcement community. Recently, the representative of the law enforcement community, Commissioner Ortega, was up for reappointment. He chose not to be reappointed. So that position is vacant right now. And the CPA position is vacant as well. Since I arrived at the commission, I've never had any more than 3 commissioners on the commission. I can't tell you why that is. I do know I have a hard time finding a certified public accountant. I've hit up the Certified Public Accountant Society. I talked to everybody I know. I think I've tweaked all your staffs as well, that if you have anybody to let the appointments office know, because that seems to be a difficult one to find interest in. My other 3 commissioners, John Mass, who's the current chairman, was a senior executive vice president at William Morris Agency, has a great marketing and business background. My other commissioner, Cynthia Flores, is vice president for the University of California at Palm Desert. Brings forward the education component, but also has a good administrative background. And then my 3rd commissioner is C.C. Yin, who I believe is up on the floor of the Senate for a vote for confirmation right now. And he, of course, brings both. He's been a great add because he's a civil engineer, had a lot of experience in civil engineering, so he's actually my commissioner who's my liaison on the new building. But he's, for the second half of his life, as he would say, has been a businessman with McDonald's franchises and very successful businessman. So they bring a lot of insight, a lot of advice, a lot of direction, and have actually been very beneficial to me in trying to institute some better decision making and other kind of changes in the culture at the California Lottery in the last couple of years. Any questions on that one?
The building.
Okay. The new building actually started almost 2.5 years ago when I brought forward during our budget process a significant increase to the maintenance budget for the current headquarters facility. And it was at that point that the commissioners started questioning, should we continue to be putting more money into the maintenance and upkeep and repair of the headquarters facility versus looking at other options. And at that time, our options were wide open. We own the 13 acres that we live on today. out off of Richards Boulevard, which is a redevelopment district for the city. The city's looking to make some major changes out there, and it stretches from North 10th Street, where I am, all the way down to the rail yards. Our building sits behind the some not so nice places on Richards Boulevard, and but now I have the CHP as a neighbor, so that's very nice as well. They've been there since they started. They bought the land in 1987. We brought in an outside consulting firm to look at the different options and what made economic sense for the California Lottery. Should we move? Should we go lease somewhere? Do we buy new? Do we stay where we are? Do we repair? Do we build new? Whatever. There were like 14, 16 different options that they looked at that time. Recommendation came back that the California Lottery, that made most financial sense, because what we were trying to do was lower our operating costs. That's something we always strive to do, was to actually own. Leasing somewhere else was more expensive for us because of all the uniqueness of the security, and we're a very, very big technology company. I mean, all those games are about the technology that we're running. And so then we got the approval from the commission to go to the next step, and the next step was, okay, if we're going to own, do we stay on the property, build here, or do we rehab the building? And so we went through that next analysis, and that's where the commission made the decision that it made sense to build a new building because of all the issues with the current building and the cost to remediate in the existing building. And then also it's also the cost of the ongoing operational costs that we have in that building. At least 2 times a year, we're shut down because of electrical system spikes and going down, which then means I have to maintain generators and everything else because we can't afford to have our gaming system operations impacted at all. So we went through that analysis, commission approved. We went through a number of gates, I'll call them, where the commission had to approve the next step. They finally got to the point where we hired an A&E firm to begin looking at the design of a building. The California Lottery is in a building. There are actually 4 buildings. There's 3 buildings that were attached and 1 freestanding building at the back of the property. The freestanding building in the back of the property we had rented out to other state agencies and some private concerns. That's where we're going to build a new building. They've all relocated elsewhere. We're going to tear down that building, build a new building there, and then once that building is built, we'll be able to vacate the 3 buildings that we're in right now and move the operations over. And that provided the least disruption and the least cost because we weren't moving somewhere off-site and then having to move back again. And it also fit with what the city would like to see in the redevelopment district as far as location of buildings to street lines and other streets that they want to add out there in the redevelopment district as well. So it played out well for their redevelopment plans. And Commission also did an environmental document.
I'm just getting next in. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's good.
I'm indicating to the chair I want to be next in.
Okay. Okay. All right. And
follow up? No.
And we've also been able to scale the building to our operations and get some efficiencies within the building as well. And of course, we're looking to be very sensitive to incorporating green building aspects, but not just to incorporate green building aspects just to have a green building. unless they can prove some sort of return on investment or a payback period within the next 9 to 10 years, I'm not interested in incorporating them.
Assemblywoman Huber.
Thank you, Chair. Just since we're talking about long-term planning, and there are some concerns that if you don't get the flexibility you need, that we could be talking about how the lottery is going to close in 5 to 10 years. And what I'm concerned about is you're on this track to build a new building while the trend lines keep going down, and you don't know that you're going to get what you need to make the games successful. What happens if 10 years from now we find that the lottery is all but dead? What are we doing with this building, and is there a liability for the rest of the taxpayers?
No, I think you'd have a very good asset, and it would probably be worth a lot more than it is currently. We did have the building that exists today appraised, and it actually came in at a lower value than what I'm carrying it on my accounting financial statements at today. So this would be a positive development. Whether the lottery continues to exist or we go away, it's still a lottery asset that would be for sale. And I would assume that if the lottery was dissolved, that all our assets would go to education.
Thank you. Assemblymember Jones.
Thank you very much. And I apologize for arriving late, and I'm going to have to apologize for having to leave early. But I came at a very auspicious moment because I did want to thank the executive director and the staff of the lottery for briefing me as the assembly member representing the headquarters location of the lottery. Probably about a year ago now. You came in and shared with me the plans for the building, and I wanted to thank you for your willingness to engage with the city and the redevelopment agency. That's actually a very targeted area of interest and concern for the city and redevelopment agency in the county of Sacramento. And our hope is, and I think we're moving very smartly in that direction, is to significantly redevelop that area and redevelop it to a much higher and better use. And so I'm pleased at the level of cooperation between the lottery and the city and the redevelopment agency, and I think that the trend lines are only positive in terms of what's going to happen in property value out there as that area becomes more and more attractive. And I am glad to see that you are looking ahead and making the sort of capital investment necessary to sustain the lottery. It was very troubling to me when I learned about the problems you're having with continuity of electrical service and your ability to continue operations out there in the current state of condition of the building. The other thing that I was appreciative of too was the possibility of some mixed-use opportunities out there, depending on what the lottery's needs may be. And right now you have some square footage that you're leasing out to other agencies that provides a revenue stream. And when anybody undertakes a building, you want to build to what your current needs are, but also your future needs, but you may not be at those future needs. So there's an opportunity to do some things in partnership with some other agencies or other entities that might provide you with a revenue stream to lease portions as well. So I'm most appreciative, and I think it makes sense for you to make this investment, and I think it's a sound investment because I think that area is only going to continue to increase in value, and based on what I've seen of your plans, I mean, you're not being lavish, but you're building a quality building out there that will serve your needs and stand the test of time, so that if something untoward does happen in the lottery, at least we have that asset. So I wanted to thank you.
Assemblymember Emerson.
Thank you for coming here to testify today. I wanted to follow up on a question of my colleague, Assemblywoman Huber, on the members of your board. Do you know, are there names before the governor's office at the present time that fit into those two categories, the law enforcement and the certified public accountant, that are being evaluated?
I don't know about the certified public accountant. I do know that they are looking earnestly for the law enforcement side. because that is a big part of my operation.
But do you know, are there names down there that are?
I believe there are.
There, okay.
Yeah.
Is there a problem with the reimbursement? Do you finding that is a problem to get people to serve on this particular commission?
You know, it's interesting because one of the first questions I'll get from a commissioner is how much time is this going to take? And they really don't get paid. They get the per diem for being at the meeting. My druthers would be, you know, I'd probably be meeting with them every month. The Lottery Act requires only once a quarter. We try to meet at least 8 times a year. And then there may be special meetings on top of that. So that does become a concern for some people.
So in addition to the per diem, they get travel, I presume, to wherever you have the meeting.
Yeah, we pay for their airfare, and they get the $100 per day.
And you always meet here in Sacramento?
No, we meet in Southern California. The predominance of my commissioners are from Southern California. We'll meet in Southern California, sometimes in the Inland Valley, sometimes over in Pasadena.
Okay, thank you.
Assemblymember Berryhill.
Well, then, I mean, really, it's just like anything. I mean, if you could pay them a little bit more per diem, if you could give them a few more benefits or whatever, it would be a little bit more, people might be more inclined to seek those jobs, huh? And I mean, here we're in a very budgetary crisis here in California right now, but at the same time, I think it's very important to have that everybody on those boards so you can make those decisions as you move forward for long term or whatever you're doing. So that might be something that you look at in the future too, of what's good for the long run and or not.
I want to ask some questions. Do you have any questions? Some questions about the packet you just gave us with
Okay.
with your overall statistics. You referenced savings that were used in 2005, 2006.
Yes, sir.
To augment the prices.
Right.
If I understood the controller's presentation, they do an annualized report that lays out what your finances are, and they verify that the percentages that are laid out in the ballot measure are followed.
Right.
How do you get savings?
What we had in 2005, 2006, and what I'm talking about basically is a reduced operating cost that we had for 2005, 2006 versus the previous year because of some new contracts that we had put into place. So they were able to take those administrative funds and put them into the prize payout pool. And we are allowed to do that by state statute. However, at the end of 2005-06, I believe I turned over something like $28 million at year end in administrative savings over to education as well. So, I mean, we don't spend money just to spend money. It's,
I just, it's interesting to me because of you have these defined percentages, and yet
as
at the end of a year, you've got quote unquote savings. And so,
because we may have held back, we may not have gone through with a marketing plan. We may have held back on a ticket. Sales may have came in higher than anticipated. So,
that
you know, we're not going to spend
revenue. Yeah,
but again, 16% of that is accorded as administrative funds, which we didn't have to spend. Yeah. Also, as part of our upfront budget with the commission, when I take that budget to them and I take the sales goal to them as well, and we're talking during the course of that, they're going to assign how much is going to go into the prize pool from my administrative funds. And we do that up front so that then I can take that money and split it out between all the different games.
Thank you. I also was looking at your chart with the employees and noticed that it's fairly flat for the last 10 years or so. Right around 600 full-time equivalent positions. We had early, as we were preparing for this, we had asked from DGS various documents, and one of the things that jumped out at me there was that there are 271 vehicles in the fleet assigned to the State Lottery Commission. So you have 600 employees and 271 cars.
Yes, that's very important to our operations.
How?
Let me explain. I have close to 200 sales representatives. Their job is to go out, deliver point of sale, and stock vending machines. They do that on a daily basis. If they don't do their job, then I don't have product out there in the retail environment to sell. One of the other things they do is they will shuttle excess inventory from one store to another store to make sure that we have our balance of inventory correct between our retail locations. So that's where the preponderance of the vehicles are dedicated to my sales reps. We actually have vans because sometimes the point of sale can get rather large. They have a lot of equipment. In addition, I have a law enforcement unit, and they also have vehicles. They're the only ones that really have vehicles.
Those two categories?
Yes.
Okay. I want to move to the issue of game integrity. One of the things that I mentioned in terms of the requests was the all Make Me a Millionaire game show audit reports. And
Yes.
what we received were, and this can't possibly be all of them because some of them are 2 days apart and some of them are months apart. But they are
we
independent accountants' reports on applying agreed upon procedures.
Yes.
That's an audit report?
That's, well, maybe we have tapings of our TV show. Let me back up. We used to have the Big Spin TV show. Mm-hmm. Okay. The TV show was awful, and it was impacting sales, and it was impacting our brand image. As part of what we put into the business plan that was one of the things we needed to deal with. We went out to bid for a new production company and a new game show. We spent almost a year developing that new game show. It went to effect in January of this year, was the first time it showed. Sales of tickets for the new game show are 40% above the sales of the tickets for the Big Spin. So the show itself has been very successful. The TV production company that we ended up with, 3 Ball and Media Entertainment, have been fantastic to work with. Now, what we do, though, is there's tapings once a month. Those tapings used to be all crammed into one weekend, one day of taping. We are now doing tapings on 2 days once a month. We've just increased the number of tapings that we're doing. When we tape, there are present KPMG, which are my outside auditors hired to observe all the procedures and make sure that we're following all of our regulations, rules, and procedures having to do with the implementation of the games on those shows. We also have my law enforcement division will have investigators present who are also observing all the actions. And then in addition, I have my draw management people who are there, and they are principally responsible. It's not the production company, but my draw management people who are part of my law enforcement division are responsible for making sure that we're following all of our procedures, because the integrity of our games are paramount. I mean, if people don't believe the lottery has integrity, our sales are going to plummet. And so it's almost like a belt and suspenders and another pair of suspenders for the game show. But what we gave to your staff person is what KPMG prepares after each taping.
Which is an overview of what they did for that given show. And what happens if something isn't caught by all of those extra suspenders? What if there is a mistake that is made and it isn't caught during the taping of that show?
Then I don't hear about it. Or I mean, if the three of them aren't reporting something,
well, I have in front of me a draw incident / anomaly report dated February 13th of 2009.
Okay.
And it's checked. It has two little boxes up on top. One is an incident, one is an anomaly. The incident box is checked off. It says any occurrence prior to, during, or after a draw that affects the proper completion of a draw procedures or the final result of the draw. Down on the description of the incident, date of occurrence, February 8th, 2009, at the KCET studios. That's in LA.
Yes.
After receiving a call from KPMG and reviewing the Make Me a Millionaire capsule selection video, it was discovered that the contestant names for shows 2 and 3 were transposed in the contestant game assignment process. The contestant numbers that were randomly drawn were recorded on the correct contestant game assignment log forms for both show 2 and 3. However, show 2 contestant names were inadvertently associated with show 3 contestant numbers and vice versa. So they flipped who was supposed to compete for which game. That's my description of it. I'm going back to the reading. The taping numbers on the forms were changed at the time of the selection process when I noticed that the show 2 contestants were listed on the show 3 form and the show 3 contestants were listed on the show 2 form. However, I didn't realize at the time that only the names were incorrect, that at the time that not only were the names incorrect, the contestant numbers were not. And there's another chart that we got that lists the different names and the numbers that were flipped. So people were at the game and should have been able to compete for certain prizes, and they weren't. And other people weren't even asked to participate based on the number being flipped.
No, actually, according to the KPMG report, I believe it says during performance of the draw, we noted that lottery staff inadvertently transposed the contestant names for 2 of the game show taping groups. So the contestants that were supposed to show up for show number 2 got switched to show number 3, and vice versa, went back and forth. It was noted after both shows had been taped.
But the report says that the numbers were flipped as well. It wasn't just the names.
According to the numbers for what?
The numbers of who is supposed to come up.
That's what I'm saying.
There's a
People
number
who were supposed
associated
to
with the
show up
person.
for game 2 were taped as part of game 3, and those people should have been part of taping for game show 2.
The contestant names for shows 2 and 3 were transposed in the contestant game assignment process. Contestants in show 2 were associated with the randomly assigned contestant numbers for show 3 contestants and vice versa. The taping numbers on the forms were changed when noticed that the show 2 contestant names were listed on the form for show 3 and thought they had just reversed the forms for the 2 shows. That wasn't the only thing that happened. There was a person who was associated with every random number. And so you, or whoever was running the show, took the person, but so they were on the show, but they were not assigned the number that would have corresponded with what they were allowed to do at the game.
The audit report that I'm looking at only talks about them being transposed between the taping of show number 2 and number 3. the incident reports that you're referring to are done by the draw management staff and then are given to the auditors. If the auditors believe that there is something that affected the integrity of the game, then they'll write it up in the audit report. What they're questioning in here is the fact that the people who should have gotten taped in show number 2 got taped in show number 3. The fairness or the integrity of what got played out wasn't questioned.
There are, on show number 2, there are 4 people who played the incorrect game and were therefore not able to play for the whatever higher dollar amounts. On the second show, on game show 3, there were 5 people who played the incorrect game and were not able to play for their higher
You've
amount.
got more information than I do right now. I would ask that you let me go back and look into this and figure out what's going on. And I will certainly get back to the full committee on this issue. And if this did occur back in February, what's been done to correct it and make sure it doesn't occur again?
Well, that's where we're going with this. We very much want to make sure that going forward, obviously, that everything has been done to avoid this from ever happening again. But I also want to ask, what happens to those people those 9 people that I just enumerated, that it seems to me played the wrong game. So what's the remedy?
Question to not just my counselor, but to the rest of my staff about what we do in those cases. Normally, if there's a case where a lottery player's been cheated out of something, I mean, we certainly remedy that with the individual players as well.
So what is the remedy? That they play again?
I don't know, sir. I'd have to go back and look and see what my rules and regs allow me to do.
Okay. Assemblywoman Buchanan?
I just don't necessarily interpret this the same way you do. So maybe the two of you, your staffs, could get together and give us a more in-depth report. Because I'm just not sure when I look at this, some of the assumptions are...
The odd thing here is if there is something that affected the integrity or the outcome of a game or the fairness of the game, KPMG would have brought it to my attention in the report. There's nothing in the KPMG report that would alert me that something to that level had happened that would have impacted the players, the fairness, the randomness, the integrity of the game. As I said, the only thing that they were noting was that people who were supposed to get taped first got taped second, and these other people came up first. It didn't impact the randomness, the integrity, or the fairness of the individual games that they actually played. So,
it does.
Not having seen this, I think I do need to look at this. I will look into it.
Let me be clear. If it was just the names and what show they were on, clearly wouldn't have an effect whatsoever. But you also pick who gets to play the Millionaire game, the California Cool game, the Safecracker game, and the Lucky Penny game based on a randomly assigned set of numbers.
Yes, that's true.
And so that was transposed along with the names. Therefore, some of them were not allowed to play the game that they were entitled to based on the right listing of those numbers. And so that's the problem here. The problem is that they needed to have played the game that they were entitled to based on the allocation of those numbers to their name.
And as I said, I'll go back and I'll look at this and figure out what went down.
I just don't interpret it that way because
how do you interpret it?
The way I interpret this is that there's a number order for who plays the game. Like in your one example, 6, 8, 10, 11, 4, 5, 2. Then when everyone goes in, there's a draw to determine who gets, who draws number 6 gets to play that game or whatever. So that's a random draw. So for you to say they played the wrong game, you're assuming that that one, the draw would have been the same as it, and you're assuming, and then when you go on further with your next sheet, you're assuming the people who played the game would have chosen the same number. So I'm just not sure that statistically that's right. And
but they didn't choose the number. The number was assigned to them. So between show 2 and 3, those numbers were flipped as well.
But it's a random process. It's like every time you flip a coin, you could get heads or tails. So
it has to
having
be
someone
random.
show up for game 3 versus game 2.
That argument is similar to if I was playing Super Lotto and the state lottery switched the numbers, the winning numbers, between 2 dates on the day that I was supposed to win. Well, the numbers are randomly drawn for both days, so that would be fine, except that the day that that the lottery knew what the numbers were and that matched my numbers and they got switched, that takes away the opportunity for the person to win.
We could talk about this for a long time, but I think that what's most important, I would think, is to have people sit down together to determine.
The numbers are assigned the day before,
right,
to these games. So the fact that from one day to the next it got changed is.
The numbers stayed the same. It's just that the people who came in to play, the ones who should have come in on day 3 came in on day 2. The ones who came in on day 2.
No, it's more to it than that. But we'll continue this dialogue.
It's not showing up in my KPMG report. So
well, again, it should have shown up somewhere else beyond this incident anomaly report, because if you have all these duplicative procedures to make sure everything is being done properly, somebody should have caught it.
Done by my draw management staff.
Okay.
So why it wasn't raised to me, I don't know.
Okay. Well, clearly very interested in that piece. There was one other
we will follow
issue following up on the GO hearing in the Senate, which we will take care of in writing since it's well after 11 o'clock. And I want to respect my colleagues. Assemblymember Emerson, any questions?
Not so much a question, but what solutions do you have that you could make this a more efficient program and raise more money for education? Any suggestions for us before we leave?
Well, my last pitch for prize payout relief is probably the most substantial and immediate impact that we could have. Again, keep in mind, this will always be supplemental funding for education. That would certainly be a huge step. I think that over time, with a slow, sustained growth approach, which means you don't go out and you don't go from where we are at the 53% in prize payout to 75% tomorrow. You take it slow over time so that you can continue to grow your sales with that. We could eventually be looking at doubling the amount of money that we're giving to education. At a time when education has lost so much funding, I don't think that's something to sneeze at. The other thing is I'm going to continue to make the lottery operation itself as efficient as possible and maximize what we can get out of the operation, increase our number of retailers, change the kind of retail environment we are in. One of the big areas that we're going to eventually need to address is the issue of their access to the lottery over the internet. Will be another big issue for us.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, we would like a response, obviously, to this material.
Yes.
What is a reasonable amount of time for you to respond?
Well, this is one of my full 5-day work weeks.
You can thank the governor for that.
Yes.
Special funded agencies should never be furloughed.
So, with that, I would say, could I get back to you on Monday and give me some time to talk to the staff and get through this and figure out what is available to the lottery director and to the lottery commission as far as remedies in this kind of situation as well, if what you say did occur. What is sitting?
Well, I'm just going off of the materials that that we did not get from you, but we did get from your department. We had two recommendations for the members. Number one, request that the State Controller's Office conduct a special audit to assess the use of contract staff and services at the California State Lottery to the extent to which these services are used in comparison with similar agencies, and to assess the risk of conflict of interest if contractors are in a position to impact the hiring of other contractors.
Who would be similar agencies?
Well, it'll be up to the State Controller to tell us. Number two, ask the state auditor to investigate allegations of anomalies in draw procedures impacting the outcome of games, and if substantiate, to recommend a proper course of action for the legislature. And then the third one would be the LAO recommendation on instituting oversight through the budget process, that lottery sales earmarked for lottery administration be deposited in a separate special fund, and that those monies be made subject to annual appropriation by the legislature. We don't have a quorum. Those are the three recommendations that the members can stew over for our next meeting. Yes.
Could I ask that we also add, since the lottery also funds the legislature, we fund the State Controller's Office, we fund the Treasurer's Office, we fund the AG's office, that you keep in mind that every time that you add to their workload, that adds to my administrative cost as well.
That's a given. Anybody in the public wishing to speak on today's subject matter? Seeing no one come forward, thank you all very much. Assemblymember Emerson.
Yeah, but before we adjourn, there's been an issue in my area that's come up that I think would be good for this committee to take a look at, and that's the recent issues surrounding the Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now, ACORN. There have been a number of allegations made, and I think since we're looking at the expenditures of dollars from the federal stimulus to state programs, I think would be advisable for our committee to take a look at some of those issues, and I'd recommend that we...
We'll look and see what if there are any state dollars that are going there, any federal dollars. We'll put something together, and then we'll talk to the members in turn about that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.